On March 4th, 1933, Franklin Roosevelt becomes the 32nd U.S. president. But why did FDR dress like a girl as a child? And did he really marry his cousin? Also, what disease nearly derailed his political career? Additionally, why was he able to serve more than 2 terms as president? The first Roosevelt came to America from the Netherlands in the mid-1600s when New York was still New Amsterdam. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born in 1882 to a wealthy family in upstate New York. Like most young boys of the Victorian era, he was dressed in girls' clothing until he was around 5 years old, when he was breeched, a milestone moment when young boys transitioned from wearing dresses to wearing breeches, a term that basically means short pants. I have to say, I'm glad that went out of fashion. FDR's mother, Sarah Ann Delano, was of French Huguenot ancestry from a prominent family that made a fortune in the opium trade and had married into the wealthy New York Astor family. FDR's father, James Roosevelt I, was a Roosevelt from Hyde Park, about 70 miles up the Hudson River from Manhattan. FDR's 5th cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, was from the Oyster Bay branch of the family on New York's Long Island. Teddy Roosevelt became U.S. president in 1901 when FDR was 19. While attending Columbia University Law School in 1905, FDR married Eleanor Roosevelt, whom he had met 3 years earlier on a train. She was Theodore's niece and therefore Franklin's 5th cousin once removed. Then President Theodore Roosevelt attended their St. Patrick's Day wedding in New York City, making the event front-page news. When asked about the Roosevelt-Roosevelt union, Teddy said, "It's good to keep the name in the family." So yes, FDR really did technically marry his cousin. Well, his 5th cousin once removed. In reality, they are not that closely related. The fact that they share a surname makes it seem closer than it is. I mean, how many people know any cousin beyond a 2nd or maybe a 3rd cousin? Let me put it this way. Franklin's great-great-great-great-grandfather, that's 4 greats, Nicholas Roosevelt, born in 1658, was Eleanor's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. That's 5 greats. That's pretty far back on the family tree. FDR decided to follow his 5th cousin Theodore's example by going into politics, but did so with a different political party. FDR was elected to the New York State Senate in 1910. 3 years later, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson named Franklin Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a position cousin Teddy had held 15 years earlier. While serving in the post in 1914, he ran in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate, but lost. FDR then continued in the role as Assistant Secretary of the Navy throughout World War I. After the war, in 1920, he made an unsuccessful bid for vice president as James M. Cox's running mate. FDR was stricken with polio in 1921 at age 39. His legs were permanently paralyzed. He spent years in intensive rehabilitation. To learn more about FDR's battle with polio, check out my February 23rd video. There's a link in the description. In 1924, he began his political comeback when he gave the speech nominating New York Governor Alfred Smith as the Democratic candidate for president. Smith lost the general election to incumbent president Calvin Coolidge. Roosevelt nominated Smith for president again in 1928. Smith lost again, this time to Herbert Hoover, but FDR was elected governor of New York. The Great Depression hit a year later in 1929, just months after Hoover took office. Many at the time blamed Hoover for the crisis, even nicknaming the Depression's makeshift shanty towns Hoovervilles. However, the seeds of the Depression were sown long before Hoover's watch began. Still, Hoover does deserve blame for not reacting more aggressively when the Depression hit. To be fair, no financial crisis of that magnitude had ever struck the nation before. It is understandable that Hoover, like many experts at the time, believed aggressive government intervention would be an overreaction. After all, the nation had made it through previous financial crises without any major government action. FDR ran against Hoover for president in 1932. With the economy as the top campaign issue, it was a landslide. Franklin Roosevelt's 1933 inauguration was the last one ever held on March 4th, with the 20th Amendment shifting Inauguration Day to January 20th for his 1937 second inauguration. In his 1933 inaugural address, Roosevelt outlined his New Deal and famously told Americans,
"I assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself."
Going all the way back to the first president, George Washington, there had been a tradition that presidents would serve a maximum of 2 terms. With the nation still in the grip of the Great Depression and World War II raging in Europe, FDR chose to run for an unprecedented 3rd term in 1940, which he won in a landslide. To his former political nemesis Herbert Hoover's credit, after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Hoover put country before party and issued this press statement. "Today there is just one job before the American people. We must defeat this invasion by Japan and must fight it in any place that will defeat it. Upon this job we must have and will have unity in America. We must have and will have full support for the President of the United States in this war to defend America. We will have victory." FDR was elected to a 4th term in 1944, but died just a few months after that term began in April 1945 at age 63. While in office, FDR deftly guided the nation through 2 of its greatest crises, the Great Depression and World War II. One major consequence of FDR's presidency is that government plays a much bigger role in our lives today than it did before his presidency. There are arguments on both sides as to whether this should be considered more of a negative or a positive consequence. The 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, adopted in 1951, now limits presidents to a maximum of 2 terms. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is one of the few U.S. presidents with a memorial in Washington, D.C. Here are other events that happened today in history. In 1678, Baroque composer Antonio Vivaldi, famous for the 4 Seasons, is born in Venice, Italy. In 1791, Vermont becomes the 14th U.S. state, the first that was not one of the original 13 colonies. In 1952, World War I veteran Ernest Hemingway finishes his classic novella, The Old Man and the Sea. In 1963, the Beach Boys released the hit Surfin' USA, a reworking of a Chuck Berry song. In 1989, Time merges with Warner, creating the world's largest media conglomerate. In 2021, a rare autographed Tom Brady rookie card sells for a record $1.32 million. In 2022, a rogue Chinese rocket smashes into pieces when it collides with the dark side of the moon. And now it's time for our Today in History quiz. How many American colonists were killed in the Boston Massacre? 5, 15, 50, or 150? liked learning about FDR? Then you'll love this one about the polio vaccine, where you'll learn more about how the disease affected FDR and how he helped eradicate it. Tap the screen to keep the story going on Today in History.